How are we to make sense of this Christian idea that the only path to salvation is through Jesus Christ? Or worse yet, the Catholic teaching that there is no salvation outside the Catholic Church. First, we're talking about salvation. We're talking about eternity of your soul. So it could not be more serious of a discussion. And so this question plagues the minds of so many people. And so today I'm going to let y'all listen to a video of Cliff Nechtel on the Jorge Janko podcast, where Jorge asks or poses this very question, and Cliff Nechtel gives a response that I really want to elaborate on, because he's really cutting to the core of the nature of God himself, and the conclusion that we draw should really stem from our understanding of God. So I'll let y'all listen. I'll be right back with that fire and wisdom.
So if a man is in the middle of the wilderness, doesn't know who Jesus is, but he looks up at the stars and he goes, my God, there's something greater than me that's made this. Then in God's eyes, he goes, that's a humble man. That's a man that I could work with.
To be honest with you, George, we don't know how God is going to judge those who've never heard about Christ, because Christ never answered the question, so I can't make it up and say this is what Jesus said. He didn't say anything about it. But we do know that God is just, God is fair. He's more fair than I will ever be, than you'll ever be, so we do know that each of us will be judged fairly, uniquely, and justly.
So right there, you have Cliff Nechtel basically say that, well, for one, we can't know anything outside of what the Bible tells us. So this limited text that the authorities put together around that time, the only thing we can know about the nature of reality must come from this text. First of all, I don't like the logical fallacy of the appeal to authority. I certainly don't trust authority. And I don't think that's a good philosophy to base your worldview on, or to base your understanding of reality on. That's not to say that I don't value a lot that's in the Bible. I do. It's a magnificent text that is unexplainable in a lot of ways. But does that mean I just close my eyes, or does that mean I just read it and accept it? Well, for one, I can't do that, because there's all different types of interpretations. Then you have the translations. So we know that we have to use discernment in this process of understanding this purportedly divine text. Okay, and so, again, Cliff starts off by saying, well, it doesn't say in the text, so we really can't know. Other people would argue that it does, because it says Jesus Christ is the only path. But as Jorge Janko points out, what does that say for someone that never was introduced to him? And so Cliff responds with, well, what we do know about God through the Bible is that he's just and he's fair. And I'm not sure if he said he's loving, but I think we know God is loving and merciful. And so if God is these things on top of omnipotent, if he is all these things, then it does not take a rocket scientist. It's safe to say that if you didn't know Jesus Christ or weren't introduced to the Catholic Church, well, then there's a path to salvation. Okay? I think they would say, oh, it's still through Jesus Christ, and it's still through the church in this other dimensional realm right before they get to heaven. So I think that's their argument. But it's just safe to say that the way people interpret the Bible as it pertains to this life and this existence, it's just not true. Jesus Christ and the Catholic Church are not the only way. And so now it begs the bigger question, what sort of leniency is there? In what situations? Because again, we're dealing with this fear of eternal damnation. So for most people, that's the biggest question in life. And so I argue that the fear itself is an illusion, and our understanding of reality is not accurate. But let's just play along here. If we go with what Cliff Nechtel said, that God is fair and just, well, then we know there must be another path. And two, for that other path, for someone that wasn't introduced to either Jesus Christ or the Catholic Church, well then God has his own way of understanding the nature of that being, right? So now let's go a step further and let's say, well, what if they were introduced to Christianity and to the Catholic Church and they were an honest person? And deep down in their core, they were virtuous and they sought after the truth. And so they did all their research. They read all the different religious texts of all different cultures. And in that process of critical thinking and intellectual thought, they come to a conclusion that isn't one of accepting Jesus Christ as your Savior or accepting the authority of the Catholic Church. Well, if that person is honest, then how can we fault them for their due diligence, their honest endeavor, that their brain led them to a different conclusion? It's the same as if they weren't introduced to Jesus Christ or the Catholic Church, if we're being fair, if we're being just. And so if you don't agree with that, well, then the argument must be that, well, they're just too stupid. And since they didn't get it right, even though they were honest and they did their best, for whatever reason, maybe the argument is they didn't do their best or they didn't listen to God. Whatever. All I'm saying is they were intellectually honest, as I am, as many other people are that come to different conclusions as it relates to the nature of reality. Should we be in fear? No. For one, no. Because we know now about vibration, frequency. We understand love. We understand that these low vibrations, these frequencies, when you embody them, it only makes your actions and your interaction with others, in which case the Bible says how you treat others is how you're treating God. So it's safe to say we shouldn't adopt a mentality that's going to lead us to actions that are not going to lead to us treating other people the best way we possibly could. Because how we treat them is how we treat God. It also says that he who keeps my commandments is loved by the Father and loved by me. So our actions are relevant. It says they are right there. And so if we know that a philosophy or a worldview or the foundation of our worldview is based in fear and other negative energies that are going to lead to negative actions, well then I think it's safe to say we should avoid those, especially if they're not necessary. And that's my argument, is that not only are they not necessary, but they are counterproductive to your actions in your everyday life, to your interactions with people, and your spiritual journey. And so back to the question of, is God just? Well, if he's just, then we know that he is looking at this individual as a whole, and he's, I guess, judging them according to that. Well, what about the ignorance factor? Again, we go back to, if that person was honest and still came to the wrong conclusion, how can God think anything other than mercifully about that individual? Again, this person that we're talking about was honest. They lived an upright life in accordance with virtue, and they did their best. And they came to different conclusions, like myself, and like so many others that are waking up to the false teachings, the authoritative narrative out of these religious institutions. Should I be afraid of my brain? Should I use discernment in this spiritual process, in this intellectual endeavor to discern the truth? Should I use discernment in discerning the truth? How absurd does that sound? It's so absurd that it doesn't make sense. It can't be true. We must use discernment, especially when we're given all these different religious texts. We have to read all these religious texts. And in that process of doing our due diligence, and for many other people like myself, spend almost their entire life pondering these biggest questions and doing all of this research. Should we be afraid? And again, I would argue, no, we shouldn't be afraid. The reason we shouldn't be afraid, just like Cliff Nechtel said, God is fair and just. Okay, Well, then if he is fair and just, then the only thing that matters is that I am honest. That's the only thing that can possibly matter. If I am intellectually honest and my conclusions come from critical thinking and rigorous work, due diligence, I should have nothing to fear. And it makes sense. That makes sense. That's what a just God would do. And so I do think that's the key here, because so many people are afraid. In my own experience, coming from a Catholic family, my path of seeing truth as it pertains to the nature of reality outside of the dictates and dogmas of religion. When I listen to these near-death experiences and people talk about God in a way that is more loving and more merciful and more understanding, less judgmental, I'm supposed to just ignore all that stuff, apparently. But I can't, because I value my intellect, I value this life, and I believe I was supposed to use my brain. But what I'm getting at is that there's a lot of pain and suffering that goes into this process. Not just for me, not just for me, because it is painful. There's a lot of fear that goes into that breaking away and recognizing that, no, I am a sovereign individual and I shouldn't fear the gifts that God gave me when I use them honestly and virtuously. Not to mention, I can't submit to any specific text without discernment. Muslims will tell you, oh, you just have to believe. Christians will tell you just have to believe. So who do I believe? Well, I have to use my discernment in that process. And in that process, in using my brain, I've come to realize that the purpose of this existence is not about religion. It's not about your perception regarding the nature of reality and the nature of God on a subject that expert theologians around the world cannot come to an agreement. And God expects me, just a mere giblet, to do a better job than they did, and they can't even come to an agreement. None of it makes sense. But it does make sense when you listen to near-death experiences. It does make sense when you listen to Jesus Christ. The kingdom of God is within. And how you treat others is how you treat God. And now science is coming around through quantum physics and their understanding of consciousness. They're validating what the ancient mystery schools have said, what these near-death experiencers are coming back saying. The science is finally coming around to provide evidence that, you know what, you're not crazy if you don't submit to the religious authoritative narrative. For one, I don't think we should trust authority. I think there's more than enough evidence for us to confidently say we shouldn't just trust authority. And so, again, we have to use discernment. I think the key here, and I'll end with this, is that the best way to understand this life and life hereafter is through our understanding of God. And if God is loving and God is omnipotent, and the claim is true that God's will is for all of us to end up with Him, well, then an all-powerful God is going to do whatever He can to rehabilitate the souls that need love the most. And those are the most troubled amongst us. The ones that we, ignorantly I would say, will look at and call monsters, as if they're not suffering enough inside of their own mind and through their own actions that are not in accordance with love and virtue. Those people are living a hell. And now I'm just a mere mortal, but I have mercy for those individuals. I can't imagine subjecting them to eternal torment after this life of the hell that they live here. Doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense if God is loving and omnipotent. And so I think we're all called to be loving, forgiving, because we were made in His image. And I think religious authority, religious institutions over the years have perverted our understanding of the nature of God and also Jesus Christ and His original message. And so I think it's important also that we maintain a positive outlook That's not to say, yeah, I'm positive, I'd do whatever I want. No. For one, I don't believe that you have to believe in an unjust, unproportional suffering of eternity for this temporal existence. I'm okay with temporary suffering as it pertains to what the near-death experiences talk about, a life review, and the recognition and the realization and the remorse that you feel having to relive your experience that you had on earth. I would imagine that comes with torment and suffering that is proportional to your life here. That's fair. So I think maybe we might have gotten it wrong on this idea of salvation. I think it's healthier for us to believe that we are all saved and that an all-powerful God that genuinely wills for all of his creation to be with him in the end is going to get his will. People will say, oh, well, he had to give us free will, so we had to... No, well, does he have will? If we have will and he has will, and on top of that, love is not just a concept, but a force in the spiritual realm that sits atop the spiritual hierarchy, then how is it that God's will and love doesn't save our ignorant and pathetic souls that supposedly decide outside of our best interest to run away from love for all of eternity, for those of the people that say that we choose it? I'm belaboring this at this point, but it's one of those subjects, the magnitude of what we're talking about here, the eternal state of our soul, I don't think it can be talked about enough. And ultimately the question, I think, is how can we live the best life? And how can our worldview and our understanding of God help us to lead the best life? And this idea that God is up there like a tyrant judging the ignorant souls that put themselves through hell throughout this life because they don't understand love and they don't understand compassion and selflessness. The idea that he would then continue to torture them is just beyond... You can't make sense of it. The only way that you can try to make sense of it is the argument from authority. That, well, it says here in this text, and the church fathers say that it is this way. Never mind the philosophers and theologians of that time that disagreed with a lot of this stuff. Like, it has to be this way. No, it doesn't have to. And I think that's why it's important to look at the results from these philosophies. I know people that are dogmatically religious like this and live terrible lives. And then I know people that see the world through a law of one understanding and a understanding of God, of love and mercy in the way that I'm talking about my understanding of them, and they lead great lives. They treat others with more respect than the people that are over here judging us, telling us that if we don't believe what they say, we have to believe because of the church authorities and the text, the authority in the text, then we're going to be damned to an unjust punishment, that an unloving God could only be the God that puts us through that. And so I think this is key because wants to bring heaven on earth. If humanity wants what's best for our children and our grandchildren, then we are coming to understand that high vibration and frequency, and at the top of that is love, oneness, authenticity. If we are to bring the most peaceful and harmonious experience, heaven on earth, as God wills, then we must, as Nikola Tesla said, focus on energy, vibration, and frequency. And I think that's unfortunately left out in the religious teachings, in the religious discussion. And I don't think it's a coincidence that at this point in time, we are finally coming together with all of this knowledge, with information technology and our ability to communicate with each other around the world. I don't think it's a coincidence that we are waking up at an increasing rate. And we are recognizing that in order to lead the best life, we have to first have a positive outlook on our being. So no, we are not dirty little sinners. We are not unrighteous. We're not unworthy. We shouldn't feel inherent shame and guilt we should live in a present state of awareness. We should accept our mistakes for what they are, learning experiences, and we should grow from each and every one of them. If we make mistakes and then sit there and sulk and have all these negative emotions that sit with us, that's not going to help us. That's not a recipe for leading the best life you can lead. And so, all over the place, but let's just sum it up in this. If God is just, God is loving, and God is omnipotent, then we don't have to fear the afterlife so long as we are honest. And whatever comes from our life, it should be proportional. Like Cliff Nechtel said, it should be fair, it should be just, and it should be unique to our experience. And so rather than fearing our relationship with God, we should see us as one with God, because in seeing that union, we will vibrate at that higher level of vibration and frequency, and it will lead us to live a better life. And our actions and how we treat others, just as the Bible said, is how we treat God. That is a reflection of our soul and our internal character and awareness, and is indicative of our future path here and in life after this. So once again, this is the Raise Our Awareness Revolution, humanity's roar. This is us waking up from sheep to recognizing that we are in fact divine lions, humble and ready to step into our divinity. And so we've got a beautiful road ahead of us. I'm Da Vinci the Truth. God bless. Love.